Hey, Sleepy Sheepy here. If you made it through that intro without unsubscribing and closing the video, I just want to say thank you. But let's go ahead and take a look at today's build. So we're going to be looking at a level 125 Poison Zweihander build. And this is going to be involving 2 Poison Zweihanders, which is obviously better than 1. For this build, we'll be putting 60 points into Vigor, 32 into Endurance, 32 into Strength, and 45 into Dexterity. I found that this was the best way to kind of min-max when both two-handing and one-handing the Poison Zwei. As for our armor, we'll be wearing the Mushroom Crown as well as the Raptor's Black Feathers. We'll also wear the Royal Remains Gauntlets and the Tree Sentinel Greaves. Together this gives us 52 poise, but if we do switch over to something like the Bowgoat Talisman, we'll hit the 69 breakpoint, which is pretty useful for tanking straight swords. As for our talismans, we'll be using the Kindred of Rot's Exaltation, the Claw Talisman, the Great Jar's Arsenal, as well as the Crimson Hammer Medallion. As mentioned, you definitely can switch over to the Bowgoat Talisman if you want more poise, but the Claw Talisman as well as the Kindred of Rot's Exaltation are going to work with the Mushroom Crown and the Raptor's Black Feathers to increase our AR for jumping attacks after we've procced poison. Due to the high damage output at meta level, I really enjoy having the Crimson Burst Crystal tier as well as the Crimson Bubble tier. However, you could switch this over to something like a Dexterity Knot or a Strength Knot since we are running essentially a quality build. So the moveset for this build is going to be pretty strong. We have all the normal kind of crouch pokes, wide sweeping swings, and charged heavies associated with the two-handed moveset, but we also have the option to use Braggart's Roar in our offhand weapon, and then pull out the double Zweihander moveset, which is going to involve these jumping attacks, which just do so much damage. We also have Poison Mist, which is a really nice way to kind of catch your opponent off guard. It comes out just a little bit later than I think most people expect, so I really enjoy the timing of it, and I feel like it can function similarly to Flaming Strike in the way that you can zone with it and effectively stop multiple opponents from kind of chasing you down. In addition, the Crouch Poke to Poison Mist is a great roll catch combination where oftentimes if your opponent isn't too far away and you land the Crouch Poke, you'll be able to get a very consistent roll catch with the Poison Mist Ash of War, and that will do quite a bit of damage. You also have access to a running L1 that I find to be pretty strong, especially if you pre-aim it a little bit. Oftentimes the backswing can kind of change up the timing enough to hit your opponent, and they may not be expecting it. One last thing I want to mention about the moveset is throughout the course of these invasions, I had the Poisonous Mist on my offhand and then Raptors of the Mist on my main hand. And I found this to be slightly worse than the Braggart's Roar on the offhand and the Poisonous Mist on my main hand. I found myself wanting to use the Poisonous Mist more often than Raptors of the Mist, and I also felt that the AR buff as well as the stamina regen buff that comes with Braggart's Roar to just be a little bit more advantageous than Raptors of the Mist. I found Raptors of the Mist was just a little bit slow and kind of predictable, harder to land than I would have liked. So this is a setup I'm recommending, Braggart's Roar as well as Poisonous Mist, but you can definitely include Raptors of the Mist if you'd like. That pretty much covers everything about the build, moveset, and strategy we're going to employ. If you wouldn't mind considering subscribing, I'd really appreciate it. But that's all I've got to say, so let's go ahead and jump into the invasions and the arena content. Alright, so jumping into our first invasion, we have a 2v1 in the Mountaintops of the Giants area, and we have a player with Bolt of Grand Sax, the Winged Scythe, and then we have another player using Stars of Ruin. So I'm trying to get out of range of Stars of Ruin and avoid the incoming damage from the Winged Scythe Ash of War to avoid getting my ability to heal taken away. So I'm trying to at least get off a couple hits on this player while I'm not getting hit with any sort of magic spells or just kind of tank those. So I'm able to get a pretty quick poison proc just using the Poisonous Mist Ash of War as a follow-up to the Crouch Poke, and we saw how powerful that was. And here I'm able to kind of take advantage of the heal that the Phantom went for. And the nice thing about this build is it kind of gets stronger over time. So that can really throw off your opponents when you have a build that gets stronger over time, because they get used to a certain level of damage, and then, you know, you might proc poison and get stronger and then land a jumping attack, which this build is optimized for. And, you know, that amount of damage you can deliver in those jumping attacks is going to be huge. And then it's just a one-on-one, so I'm able to go for a nice, you know, shield swap and parry and riposte on the host. So next up, we're going to have a 3v1, and this is kind of unfortunate. So I didn't realize this until after I filmed the intro, and if you looked closely at the intro, I had plus 15 Zweihanders. So for some of these invasions, I'm going to be at meta level using plus 15 weapons, which means the damage output is going to be very lackluster. So just if you do see a particularly low damage invasion or duel, it's probably because it was before I realized that my weapon was, you know, at a very low damage output. So just something to bear in mind there. This actually can deliver quite a bit of damage despite being poison infused, but it does help if you go to plus 25 if you're going to be running this at meta. So this is one of those invasions where the damage output is going to be lower, but it is actually kind of nice because you get to see just kind of the moveset a little bit more when you're running a lower weapon. You're gonna kind of encounter some difficulty, obviously, because you have to land more hits, but if you have to land more hits, then you need to kind of go for the full variety of the moveset. So yeah, it ends up being kind of a weird flex, but definitely I'd recommend going for the plus 25 Poison Zweihanders rather than the 15. So basically I was able to take care of one opponent pretty early on, and then go in trying to get some surprise jump attacks on my opponents, just kind of come around the corner real quick and land a jumping attack. And then I'm also trying to proc Frostbite as often as possible, just so that if I do manage to land one of those burst damage attacks like a jump attack, I'll be in a great spot to really maximize the possibility to one-shot my opponent. So, you know, at meta level, one-shotting your opponent is fairly commonplace, and having a build that can do, you know, upwards of 1,000 damage is not wildly out of the, you know, kind of norm. So in this case, we are, you know, doing 800 on jumping attacks once all of our buffs are in place. So pretty good. And what's really nice about this build is it can be like a really aggressive Estus punish. So if you manage to continuously land jumping attacks, you'll probably proc poison, and you're probably going to be doing more damage than they will be getting health back from their heal. So that's a really nice spot to be in, where every time you punish their Estus, their overall health is getting lower. It's not just canceling out. So there I was able to land a few jumping attacks and ultimately bring in the W with that invasion. So this is going to be another one with plus 15 weapons, so, you know, just kind of bear that in mind. But you can also see that it's not actually terrible. You know, landing 400 on a Ash of War is not like the worst thing ever. So we also get a poison proc, and we just have a player that's really aggressive with their fist weapons. So you know, not maybe the best call from them to stay aggressive when they were in that position, but it definitely worked out in our favor, where we could eventually use some hyper armor from this weapon to get that kill. And then we also have kind of a stage hazard of a lobster involved. So once I do land a jumping attack, the claw from the lobster comes down, and that's enough to finish off my opponent. So next up we have a 3v1, and this involves some pretty obnoxious rot breath coming in, so definitely need to be aware of that. So what I do is just use a ballast to get rid of that rot breath, and then kind of Leroy Jenkins it into the full party. So I don't think they were expecting this level of aggression, and I'm able to land 2 jumping attacks, kill 1 phantom, and nearly kill another in the process, and just get a nice roll poke and manage to kill that other phantom. And then here, unfortunately, I don't get the riposte damage despite guard breaking my opponent, but it's all right. It's, you know, a 3v1 turned into a one-on-one, so I'm kind of in the driver's seat, and I'm able to land a jumping attack, and this opponent is definitely panicking a little bit. And here we can kind of see those powerful Estus punishes. Every time they heal, they're getting lower and lower on health overall, and eventually I am able to just grab a backstab. That time it did do damage, and we're in a great spot to kind of win that one. So next up we have another 3v1, and this one was another one, I believe, with the plus 15 Zweihander, where I'm definitely struggling to do a ton of damage, but it's, you know, still manageable in the context of these players. So we have somebody with Radon's Helm, and I go for a jumping attack, and after buffing with the Poisonous Mist Ash of War, I'm able to kind of do a huge amount of damage and hit them for, you know, most of their health. So a little bit of a vigor check there, but nothing too crazy. The output for a jumping dual Colossal Sword attack should be pretty high, especially if you're buffed in the way that I am. And to try to balance this as well as, you know, the game kind of balances it for you. When you're using this chest piece, you really do have pretty low poise. So that's kind of something that you'll see here is I'm dealing with a player with dual daggers and I've got pretty low poise, so I'm getting poise broken frequently. So that's kind of the trade-off when you go for something that's kind of high damage, you know, based on the armor that you're wearing, and you sacrifice a talisman like the Bullgoat Talisman to utilize stuff like the Claw Talisman. So, you know, it's kind of the give and take, and for me, just, you know, kind of as a challenge too, I'm trying to utilize less poise in builds, and having a weapon like a Colossal Sword is a really logical one to do that with, because you have natural hyper armor. So it's not like you're running a low poise damage build with low poise yourself. You can still trade, and that's going to be pretty key. So here we get very close to killing the Phantom with just the poison proc. They do go in for a heal, but again, that Estus Punish is just so powerful on this build, so we're able to just kind of land that jumping attack, even though they did get the heal animation in before the poison killed them. So next up, we just have the Host, and at this point, I really wanted a parry, but they weren't really setting it up well, so I just kind of kept up the L1s and swing my left-handed sword, and that was enough to just kind of catch them a couple times. So didn't really have a good option for the parry, but I did have the shield out and was looking for it. This next invasion is a 3v1, and I thought this was just kind of interesting. This one is one that is fairly typical, I think, at meta, where you have three pretty powerful players and they're all using pretty strong weapons. So you see immediately I get chunked with just one hit from the Colossal Sword from the Host, and then we have some magic spam coming in from the other players. And this is less a demonstration of skill with this weapon and more a demonstration of just evasion and kind of knowing when to call it quits. So there's a player with dual curved swords, and then we also have Moonveil, and then we have a Colossal Sword. So one bad stun lock can absolutely, you know, just destroy me. I'm trying to get a little bit of aggression in the process, so you can see I go for a jumping attack, and then I also go for a Poisonous Mist. So I'm trying to not do nothing, but I really do need to backpedal, and here was kind of a scary moment where that door was closed, and if I had stayed in there too long, I definitely would have gotten blundered. So it was really just kind of a intense moment where I was, you know, very close to making one mistake and dying, and, you know, my blood loss meter is still going up, even, you know, despite the fact that I'm not getting hit. I'm getting the phantom hits from that blood loss buildup, so that gets kind of intense. But eventually I do make it into a slightly more open area with PvE, and that's kind of what I was going for. I was hoping to find an area where I'd have a little bit of cover, and here I'm able to just one-shot this phantom and bring it down into a 2v1 where things are a little bit more manageable. And at this point, the basilisks really do the rest for me and take out the Host with Deathblight. So it was, you know, not the invasion I wanted in terms of just kind of content where I kill all the opponents, but I did think it was still a useful demonstration. This next one I was really happy about was this Frostpot that knocked this opponent down as the elevator was going up, and then I comboed that into a jumping heavy that finished them off. So I don't usually have free aims that go that well, and it's kind of rare for, you know, just the timing of everything to work out like that. So I was pretty happy with that kind of introductory moment. And the rest of this invasion is kind of just a lot of Ashes of War on this elevator. It kept going up and down, and I was kind of for it. I thought it was kind of an interesting way to play, and there's also weirder interactions that you get with Ashes of War where the location of the startup for an Ash of War stays in the initial spot, but the space around it is moving up. So as the elevator goes up or down, the Ash of War kind of stays in the same place. So that can create some kind of weird interactions where, you know, the sphere of damage around a person will be going above their head as they're going down the elevator or something. So I just thought it was kind of interesting, and we had some moments where I was just kind of dodging my opponents, trying to find good openings for the burst damage and try not to take too much damage in the process, which is definitely easier said than done. But I think there I went for a pretty good trade, understanding that I'd have enough hyper armor from the jumping L1 to, you know, deliver both hits, and even though I'd get hit by that Ash of War, it was worth the trade for sure. And I get my opponent to a pretty low health, but they are able to heal. I still get the poison proc in though, so my AR is now buffed, and I get a nice free throw there, which does allow me to have a little bit more time with my opponent. The elevator goes back down, and we kind of are all just, you know, rolling around each other trying to get our burst damage off. We have somebody going for some jumping heavies with a single-handed Twin Blade, which is kind of hilarious to me because it has such a small hitbox. And eventually I do kind of accidentally kill the host. I was going for the Phantom at the time, but managed to get the Phantom as well. So it ended up being a pretty solid invasion there, and just kind of interesting with the context of the elevator. So next up we have a 2v1 in Limgrave. So definitely an attempted gank situation at meta level. And we have a player that switches over to a bow, and that definitely was not the right idea. It gave me the opportunity to go for a jumping attack, and so they kind of changed tactics there and go for Moonveil, which, you know, I can't exactly blame them, but I kind of combo their whiff into a Poisonous Mist attack, and that gets them very low on health. So now I'm kind of going for the chase down. In my original Poison Zweihander video that I posted about a month ago, I just used one Poison Zweihander and also had an offhand off stock. And that would have been extremely helpful in moments like this, but since this was the sequel video, I really wanted to kind of keep it to only Poison Zweihander and use just, you know, the dual move set, because I think it's a lot of fun, and it's very much in the spirit of the memes that live with Poison Zweihander. So eventually I am able to take care of the Phantom, and then here I go for a really nice moment where I combo 4 hits in a row and all of the attacks were different. So that's just something to note, is that like the timing for every single one of those attacks was different. We had Poisonous Mist, we also had just a regular attack, and then a L1, and I believe a crouch poke at the end there, but every single attack was different. There might have been a heavy in there as well. So just every single time you attack and switch up with, especially with these weapons, is going to be important, because it can be really tempting to go for just only jumping attacks. And, you know, that is going to be the strongest aspect of this build. But if you go for only jumping attacks or only L1s and don't incorporate crouch pokes and don't incorporate heavy attacks, then you're going to be very predictable, and it's going to be very hard to kind of keep your opponent guessing, and they're probably going to be able to roll out of most of your attacks. So here's another example where, you know, you can see the different attacks that I'm going for, and I get very close to killing my opponent, but they do a good job of kind of getting away. They are fat rolling, so they're not too much of a threat, so I kind of decide that I can go for Braggart's Roar. The Phantom in this invasion was definitely the scariest part, where, you know, they were definitely over leveled. I think I got 30,000 runes for killing them, and the damage output they could do if I wasn't careful with my attacks and kind of navigating the incoming damage from the host. And navigating the incoming stun locks, I should say, is more important. Like, sometimes a host might not be actually doing that much damage, but their stun lock can allow you to get stuck in one place long enough to get hit by a Phantom that could be doing huge damage, especially if they're over leveled. So, you know, being aware of the stun locks around you, especially with lower poise builds, is going to be important. This next invasion is during a Blade of Maya stream, so if you haven't heard of Blade of Maya, they do really great streams. They're on Twitch. I'll link their account in the description, and they do a lot of taunt or tongue runs. So here I'm co-invading with another person on Twitch, and we're just kind of trying to navigate the pretty strong players that we have with, you know, Blade of Maya is obviously very strong, and then they've got a teammate that I'm also going for who does a good job of backstabbing me here. But this was just kind of a fun invasion where me and my teammate really, I think, did a decent job of kind of maintaining pressure and trying to help each other out. And, you know, here I'm getting really low on health. They come in with a dual lance attack that does a lot of damage. There, it was kind of a calculated attack that I knew would hit both my teammate and the Phantom, and I saw that my teammate had enough health to tank it, so I decided that it was worth it. It was like a split-second decision. Obviously, you don't want to hit your teammate, but sometimes I think it's worth it if you can, you know, win the invasion because of it, and that was kind of a moment like that. So Definitely a fun time on Blade of Maya's stream. Definitely check it out. But moving on to our next invasion, we have a 2v1 outside of the Lanedale boss fight area, and we have a lot of just kind of zoning type Ashes of War that we need to deal with, as well as just very spacious attacks coming from the katanas in play. So katanas were one of the weapons that were hardest to deal with because they had really big range. They were very, they had very high damage output, and they had the ability to stun lock me with a single hit. So with the lower poise build, I needed to be very careful of these kind of long-range, quick weapons that could stun lock, and katanas were some of them, and so finding a moment like that where I could go for Poisonous Mist was really important. So next up we have a 2v1. We have some Rivers of Blood going on, which is pretty common to see still. I guess I'm not sure if I agree with kind of the decision to buff it back, but it's definitely somewhat viable, and especially in the context of 2v1s where you're on the side with more players, it's a very useful thing to have, because just the amount of blood loss buildup it can do can really, effectively take away invaders' ability to be in a certain space or be aggressive at all. So I do manage to kind of isolate the two and get the Phantom down, and now it's just a one-on-one. And so here I'm just kind of trying to better understand what my opponent's going for, and do manage to combo a rolling crouch poke into the Poisonous Mist as a roll catch, and it's just such a solid roll catch. I really enjoy it. So next up we have another 2v1, and this Phantom was going for a lot of self buffs. You can see I had a couple free aims. I'm not sure what was going on. I generally recommend going for a 360 before free aiming, just because you know exactly which way you're facing. But in this case, I didn't go for that 360, and you can kind of see the results. So this 2v1 is very high damage output. The Waves of Gold, as well as Giant's Flame Take Thee, were definitely chunking me effectively, and I was most worried about the Phantom because of the self buffs that kind of went out at the beginning. I wasn't sure how over leveled they would be, and I knew that if I got hit with Waves of Gold, especially with the desyncing issue, it would probably be an issue. So I managed to avoid it and then just go for 2 jumping attacks, which were enough to kill the Waves of Gold player, and it was a little bit faster than the attack they were going for. So again, trying to find that opportunity, that just little window where you can be just a bit faster and stun lock your opponent, is going to really be pretty solid for being successful with this build. So next up we have just a one-on-one, and I just kind of thought this one was funny and also within the spirit of the Poison Zweihanders. So we managed to get some quick hits off on our opponent and then roll incoming damage, and then we spend the rest of the invasion just kind of walking at them menacingly. And with the poison proc and the low damage, we are able to get the win. And it's just a nice example of using poison as a pressuring tool. Like, it doesn't do that much damage, but it really can make the difference. Obviously, there was probably a more efficient way to go after that player in the last invasion, but it's, it can be in moments where it's not so unchaotic, where there's too much going on and you don't have the opportunity to stop that poison proc, and you are able to just kind of defeat your opponent with that little bit of tick damage over time. So this next invasion was a 2v1 where we had some kind of scary Ashes of War coming in. We had Moonveil as well as Mirai's Greatsword, and Mirai's Greatsword can do a ton of damage if you get stuck in it, especially at lower poise when you're less likely to be able to roll out of it. It can really add up quickly, so getting rid of that Phantom early was really beneficial. And then here we're kind of just going for the chase down, and playing against a player with a Great Shield is pretty difficult with this build because you don't have a lot of quick options. So really going for a kick, I would say, is one of the best options against a player with a Great Shield, especially if they're, being pretty protective. But here I was able to utilize Raptors of the Mist pretty effectively when they were kind of stuck in their animation for Moonveil. Next up we have our Duels section. So this first player is definitely a good player. They've got kind of like the maxed out duel rank, and they're using a very solid Great Spear. So I really need to kind of be careful here and time my rolls. You can see there they went for a talisman swap since the little animation showed up on them. So I didn't get as much damage as I normally would have because of that talisman swap. So that was definitely a smart play by them. But I do get the poison proc in the process of the Poisonous Mist attack, and that's going to be really helpful here because the amount of damage they can do is pretty high with each hit, and so when I do actually land Raptors of the Mist, the amount of damage I get with that jumping attack is pretty huge. And here we're going to see something that was pretty common in the arena that was actually a really solid reason to run this build in the arena, is people going for the Ballast to cure the poison, and in that moment being able to land a jumping attack. So this next duel, we're going to see a player with an offhand Cestus, and you could see I went for a talisman swap just very early on because I played this player earlier and they beat me because they did a great job of utilizing the stun locks associated with the Cestus. And so I wanted to bring my poise up a little bit so that if I were to get hit with that Cestus, it would, you know, hopefully stun lock me less or not at all. So that was just kind of a decision I made. And here I go for a trade, even though I'm low health. I understand the amount of damage that they're bringing in, and there they did a great job of just quickly swapping to their Poison Ballast and getting rid of the poison damage, but I still have the buff associated with it. You can see kind of like the red aura around my body is a good indication that I still have that poison buff. So eventually I do proc poison for a second time, and here is a moment where really the pressure of me just being close to them was enough to kind of take them out, where they weren't really sure if they could go for an attack, and the ticks from the poison were the determining factor in winning that duel. So next up we have a player with a heavy thrusting sword as well as a parry shield. So I'm using the two-handed moveset, so I can't get parried. Definitely was not interested in getting parried, and I also see that we have some latency here, so I go for the Poisonous Mist Ash of War after a crouch poke, and I feel like under normal circumstances that might have comboed. And there you can see another instance where somebody goes for a Poison Ballast and in the process gets hit with the jumping heavy. So definitely effective in the course of duels. And then we also managed to grab a quick backstab, not that it was super necessary, but always fun to have moments like that. So this next duel is going to be with a player with the curved greatsword of the Bloodhound Fang, and I think I was doing a decent job of reading them. I also believe this was a duel that I ran while I still had the plus 15 Poison Zweihanders, so this did require more hits than usual, I think, to win that invasion, but it was just kind of a nice flawless where I didn't take any damage in the process and managed to kill my opponent. So definitely a good duel there. And this next player is going to be using claws, so I'm able to get an early frost proc on them, which is going to put me in a good spot to land just a ton of damage later on. Once I get the poison proc off, they're going to be taking more damage because they've been frostbitten, and then I'll also have the damage buff associated with the poison, and if it's a jumping attack, then I'll just be doing tons and tons of damage because there are, you know, three different factors kind of at play that is either lowering their ability to negate damage or increasing my ability to do damage. So there we got the Raptors in the Mist jumping attack, and we were able to come out with a W in that invasion. Next, we have a duel with a dual dagger player, and this person was definitely a little bit difficult to deal with. The low poise damage associated with daggers is more of a problem when you are running low poise, so I'm also trying to avoid some of the incoming blood loss because they are doing a decent job of getting that blood loss meter pretty high. And I started switching to fan daggers just because their play style is a little bit it's a little bit passive. So if I can encourage them to get a little bit more aggressive, I'm going to be in a better spot to punish them. So there you can see I'm able to kind of whiff punish them with just a crouch poke, and I tried to vary up my movement quite a bit so that when I actually do go for that jumping attack, it's more of a surprise. And that's something that I definitely recommend, is going for just kind of random jumps throughout. If you use too many jumps and only go for jumping attacks after them, then I think you're going to be pretty predictable. But if you jump a lot and do nothing, then it's kind of confusing for your opponent to determine whether or not it's actually a threat or not, and it can kind of lull them into a false sense of security. So this next invasion was a player that had beaten me earlier, but I had kind of gotten a little bit better of an idea of their play style, and here was another moment where they went for the poison ballast and I was able to land a jumping attack. So that really happened multiple times and was pretty effective. So this last part of the Invasion and Arena showcase is going to be a 2v2, and this was just with random people, and this isn't necessarily the best demonstration of just like me playing amazingly or anything like that, but I thought it was kind of interesting in the context of a 2v2 where we have players using fairly meta setups. We had a dual lance player, and then we also have a player with quickstep as well as a halberd, and that's going to actually become a huge factor in the number of times that I get backstabbed. But I think this is going to be useful to look at just in kind of understanding a good play style when it comes to 2v2s, where, you know, my teammate dies fairly quickly, and, you know, we have one kill, so I think it's all tied up at this point, but I'm trying to just dodge incoming damage and stay alive for as long as possible, also kind of doing my part in delivering damage on this player with the halberd. And really, this player with the halberd was very difficult to kill with the Poison Zweihanders setup because they were using quickstep. They were definitely a solid player in general, and this was one of the biggest issues, was they were very effectively backstabbing me, and that's going to be a very kind of important factor to understand in the Poison Zweihander moveset, especially with both of them, is that your jumping attacks really leave you open for backstabs, and players can be pretty slow in coming by and getting them. They don't have to be like very strong in terms of their spacing. You'll be down kind of facing a single direction for a long period of time. So they're able to backstab me again, and I was able to land one at least jumping attack, and here they get a third backstab. So, definitely a player that kind of knew what they were doing and was difficult to deal with, but I was able to kind of punish that Thunderstorm Ash of War as they went for a weapon swap. And this 2v2 just kind of felt funny because you have people going for very, very meta setups, and I'm kind of coming at them with Poisonous Mist and some jumping attacks and just kind of hoping that it works. But I also do get to kind of practice a lot of spacing and just kind of timing and dealing with difficult setups, regardless of my build. So I'm trying to maximize the damage I can do with hyper armor, and also just avoid incoming damage and really get good reads on my opponents. And so at this point, I think we might be winning. My teammate was definitely dying more quickly than I was, but maybe getting more kills more quickly than I was. So I'm not sure if I've died at this point, but it's just kind of like I try to deliver as much damage and get at least one person aggro on me at all times. I think they kind of recognize my teammate maybe as a slightly weaker link, or at least a little bit easier to deliver damage on. So that allows them to kind of 2v1 them, and I'm trying to do my best to deliver as much damage as possible. So here was a moment where I was very low health for quite a while, and I was able to get a jumping attack on the player with the dual lances and take them out, and then get a guard break and riposte on the player with the halberd. And I went for a trade and just kind of misjudged how much damage I was going to do. I kind of was hoping we would both die, where I would land Poisonous Mist and they would land their attack, and here I finally get a backstab on the opponent as they went for a backstab on me. So it was nice to finally have that moment. I go for a quick buff with the Barbaric Roar, and now I'm in a pretty good spot to deliver a lot of damage. The player with the dual Great Spears is not doing a great job of kind of keeping both of us in their purview. So I think it's important to kind of be aware of where everybody else is on the map. Like, take moments where you unlock from your opponent and just kind of look around, because if you don't, you're going to be very susceptible to huge burst damage of either jumping attacks, or had this been a different style 2v2, could have seen Waves of Gold or Moonveil. So just knowing where your opponents are is pretty important. And there was another nice moment where the poison actually made a difference, where the just kind of ticks added up, and that resulted in kind of a W there for that one-on-one situation. And I'm able to kind of help out my teammate, and I'm kind of in a bad spot at this point where my health is pretty low. I'm getting chased down by the player with quickstep and really just trying to avoid attacks. And there I unlocked and went for a crouch poke and just happened to have kind of the right angle with that. So it's kind of a weird camera angle, but it was very helpful to be unlocked in that moment, even though I had this kind of overhead view. And here I somehow managed to stay alive till the end, and that results in a stalemate. As always, if you made it this far, I just wanted to say thanks so much for watching. Really appreciate all the support. And if you do have any questions about this build or suggestions for future builds that you'd like to see, definitely let me know. I had a great time putting together this build, and Poison Zweihanders is something that's kind of near and dear to my heart. I love the meme, and I love the weapon. So yeah, that's all I've got, and I hope you have a good one.